Hello, and welcome to this Thursday evening panel debate. Do you mean black or do you mean BAME? Before we start, I'd just like to ask and to just say, I hope everybody is well and to thank you for your time and for participating in this event. So I'm just going to take a moment to walk you through the schedule. I'm going to share my screen to do that. So what you can see is we're starting now, first few minutes, 5 minutes, to just do housekeeping and welcomes. Between 6:05 and, for about 15 minutes, we're going to have an input from our colleague who will be talking about the university's work on the Race Equality Charter. Between 6:20 and the rest of the debate, I'm going to introduce you to the panel, give you an overview of what the debate is about, and then we'll start the panel discussion. The panel discussion will consist of the panel members individually taking a bit of time to talk to the panel, to the discussion question, and then we're opening up to the audience for question and answers. We'll take general questions from the audience, and then once we've had a chance to deal with those, we'll take a closing comment from each person on the panel. Okay, so that's the kind of order of events and the way that we're going to be working. So without further ado, at this point, I think that what I will say is welcome. I would like to move us on and to just very briefly say that we're starting off with an input from Baljit Kaur, who is the Deputy Director for Finance and the Senior Race Equality Champion, and she's responsible for overseeing the progress of our Race Equality Charter and the Action Plan. So I'd like to go over to Bal.
Thank you, Marilyn. And to the rest of the panel for allowing me a little bit of time just to update you on our Roehampton community and on the work that's taking place with regards to the Race Equality Charter. As Marilyn's mentioned, I was lucky enough to be the Senior Race Equality Champion and to take part in the submission for our Race Equality Charter Bronze Level Award. And the submission was made in July this year, so July 2020. As part of our application, we've outlined a detailed action plan. The plan includes over 130 tasks and actions that the university has made a commitment to complete over the course of the coming months and the next couple of years. My role in this process is to monitor the progress made against the plan and the timelines that have been set within the plan. It's also to work with our BAME staff network, our student, religious and cultural groups, to ensure that the actions and targets that are set out in the plan are making a real change for both our staff and students. My role also involves establishing a network across the university of departmental race equality champions. Therefore, in the next couple of weeks, we'll be putting out a call to anyone who's interested in taking on this role to work alongside me, the BAME staff network, to promote the actions that have been achieved, but also to feed back on any race equality matters, both within the academic and professional services departments. In addition, we've also set up an action plan working group, and the working group has representatives from the Roehampton Student Union on there. We've also got a representative, an academic representative, and 2 representatives from our professional services. The plan is that the group will meet on a monthly basis and will feed back any comments and concerns about the progress that's been made against the plan. The group will report into the Vice-Chancellor's advisory group, and that meets on a weekly basis. And if there's a need, we'll report directly into the Vice-Chancellor. Now, I just wanted to say that going forward, what we'll be doing is we'll be doing regular updates via the university website and via Roehampton News on the progress that's been made and when tasks have been completed. The action plan is available on the university website, and there was a link in the September Roehampton News. So if you've got some time, please do click into it and have a look in terms of all the actions that have been outlined. And it's got all the full details in there and the timelines. For now, I'm really pleased to report that we've made some really good progress in terms of establishing a working group and the structure needed to support the plan. A couple of really quick examples include setting up the unconscious bias training, which will be going live for our colleagues in the coming weeks. And members of the BAME staff network have provided some excellent feedback on that training prior to it being launched. With regards to our future students, the recruitment team had offered some virtual open days as an alternative to our on-campus open days. And for our current students, I know that the Student Union has done some fantastic work with regards to student-led induction sessions. And as part of the plan, we're looking forward to seeing more of these type of sessions in the coming year. So that's pretty much all I wanted to update for now. I just want to say thank you to Marilyn and the rest of the panel for giving me a few minutes to just update you, and that I'm really looking forward to watching the rest of this really important debate. Thank you, Marilyn.
Thank you very much, Val, for that kind of comprehensive coverage of where we're up to and how we're going to proceed with this important piece of work. So thank you. Okay, so what I want to do now is to just move on to the debate and to let you know that this is an internal debate, as in all the panel members are staff or students or ex-students from Roehampton. And we thought that was really important because we're grappling with and unpacking a set of issues that are going to be, you know, whatever solutions or whatever we come up with will inform the work and the way that we work here at Roehampton. So our panel is made up of, as I said, an alumni member of our student group, a current member of our student group, one of our academics, and someone from professional services. So I'd just like to spend a moment to just introduce each of them to you. So I'd like to start off with introducing you to Safio Youssef. And Safia was a human rights and legal practice graduate here at Roehampton and is a Master's of Law. So Safia's got experiences of doing undergraduate and postgraduate studies and is still involved as an alumni. And we just really thank you for your contribution. I'm then going to move on to Cassius Campbell, and he is the lead student counsellor as part of our welfare team here at Roehampton University. And he's a lead trainer, he's a facilitator, he's a supervisor on several external organisations and works prolifically in the area of fatherhood and working with Black groups. I'd like to introduce you to Nakima Reid. And Nakima is a current third-year law student. And last year, she was Vice President of Universal Black Minds, which is the Society for Black Students here at Roehampton. And Nakima is an international student, and she came from America to join us to do her studies. So she's going to bring, alongside with her own views, an American perspective to this discussion. And then I'd like to introduce you to Barry Malik. And Barry is a visiting professor and senior research fellow at Barari University, and he's also a Roehampton academic in the business school. And Barry will talk to us again from an academic perspective, from a personal perspective, and we will have, as you can see, 4 very different people, very different kinds of experiences, and all coming to grips with the same topic area. So to start the debate, we're going to hear from each of the panelists in turn, and then we'll go over to questions. And to just remind you, the question that we're debating tonight is, do you mean Black or do you mean BAME? And to help us with that question, I'm just going to pose possibly one question, which is, does terminology matter? Does this matter? And at that point, I think I'll open up with Safia. Would you mind going first? Okay.
Of course. So I understand the objective and the functionality of using the terminology BAME, but I think for me personally, it hides the realities of systematic inequalities which are experienced between different groups. I personally have never used the term BAME to describe my ethnicity because I don't feel a connection to the term. And I don't feel it really reflects the specificity of my ethnic identity. I'm half Egyptian, half English. And this in itself is a complex identity, being from a mixed background. And I remember when I spoke to my dad about this issue of filling in your ethnic identity on forms, and he's Egyptian, and he said, as an Egyptian, he doesn't identify as Black, he identifies as Arab. So this complicated my identity even further, because on forms I then had to put mixed white/Arab rather than white/Black. And I think this highlights the issue of terminology such as BAME, because it forces people into these restrictive categories that don't actually describe their ethnic identities at all. And I think for me personally, if I used the term BAME to describe myself, I would feel a sense of losing pride in being Egyptian, and it would take away from my individuality. So that's why I think when it comes to racial terminology, it's important to be really specific about what ethnic group is being spoken about, rather than lumping everyone into one category.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I was still on mute. So what I'll do now is go over and get an input from the next person. So I'll go to, I'm just doing it the way that you are on my screen. So I'm going to go over to Barry now and ask Barry if you'd like to come in and give us a few minutes on your position. Sorry, you're still muted, Barry.
Sorry, and there
That's
I was
okay.
saying to Mary, I can't hear you. Thank you very much, and it's been a great pleasure joining the panel. And would like to, I concur with Safia. There's a lot of what Safia said that spoke to me directly. If I may just give you just an inkling of what this means to me. I may be slightly controversial, but for me, the term BAME is dead. And it's something that's been at best conveniently used, and at worst lazily used, to describe about 40% of the British population. It's really just totally centered on the white, non-white dichotomy. But we've developed much more than that. And as a result, within the whole so-called BAME aspect, we have different ethnic minorities that have also experienced racism in different ways. Would you mind if I denote COVID as an example, if I may? I'm married to a doctor and have seen COVID very up close and up front through her experiences anyway. And as a person of color myself, what really brought it home was these huge headlines about COVID deaths from BAME backgrounds. And I came to the conclusion, and discussing this with my wife, was that the current pandemic actually has become almost a magnifier of existing inequalities. And for the first time in a number of years, put a huge spotlight on Black, Asian, minority ethnic communities. But the thing for me, what it really lay bare, was that it really concealed the communities that were really suffering the most. For example, the Black community, particularly, according to the Oxford Centre for Evidence-Based Medicine, was suffering almost up to 80 hospital deaths a month, 80 hospital deaths per 100,000. Whereas this was not quite the same with other ethnic minorities. So, for example, Chinese people were in a position of not having as many deaths or dying from COVID as the white population. So what this actually did was this BAME nomenclature ended up concealing, which I think is absolutely reprehensible, deaths within the Black community, and therefore as a result also contributed to that, because it hid those particular facts. And therefore, it then also slowed down getting help to those particular communities that really needed it, and then getting the message out to them. So for me, that term BAME, lumping everybody together, ended up concealing vital data on various communities and how it was actually, how COVID was actually affecting them. If we take the argument just a little bit further, please, Marilyn, tell me when to stop.
We're fine for time, so please.
Thank you. Taking the argument further and going on to Safio's point in terms of identity. Normally when people meet me, and especially if I speak to them over the phone, they get an impression. Sometimes I can really put on a cut glass English accent. But beyond that, the question normally then comes back when I meet them. It comes to the point where, oh, Barry, so where are you from? And it is this, I'm from Yorkshire. Believe it or not, I was born in Yorkshire, raised in Buckinghamshire. And that elicits another question. Oh, well, no, Barry, I mean, where are you from originally? So that kind of othering ends up making my identity very important to me. And I'm sure it does to many other people who are lumped together in that BAME category. For example, for myself, when if I see that they want to know something further about me, I then would end up telling them, but obviously this doesn't usually happen. They normally say, so where are you from? And I just say, oh, Pakistani, British Pakistani. But they don't know the hinterland of that my family was originally Arab, just like Safia's, from the Hijaz, and migrated to India, conquered India, and then fought with the Mughals at the Battle of Panipat, which is the Asian equivalent to the Battle of Agincourt, and then continued on working with the British Indian Army, and then moving over here to the United Kingdom. So it's a lot more nuanced than just being Pakistani or being Arab or being Asian or whatever, because Asian, in my context, covers everywhere from basically just this side of the Middle East of Afghanistan all the way down to the other side of China. So which Asian are you actually talking about, with all due respect? So as a result, then identity becomes a very important thing. But when terms like this end up harming people, and for me, I find it terribly reprehensible that data and figures were lumped together, especially under the COVID situation, and actually was responsible for untimely action being taken in terms of various sections of our society to get timely help, and then see how this has affected them. That I find the most difficult thing in this particular term. And as a result, that's why I said BAME for me is dead. We have to use another term, or we have to describe ourselves in another way than in this particular connotation for me. So it doesn't hold water, not for me anyway.
Okay, thank you. So you've got a position on that. I think what I'd like to do now is to go over to our student and ask Nakima if you'd like to come in on the conversation. Thank you, Barry.
Yes, so as it's been described before, I am the international student from the States. And when it comes to terminology of how I've always described myself, it's always been Black, African American, more Aboriginal. These sorts of terms would be terms that I've used to describe myself. BAME is what I encountered coming here to the UK. And it, to me, is highly problematic as a Black American to use this term, considering the issues at hand in the States. And our issues in the States are not only primarily a Black and white issue, because all of our systems are racist white institutions, and they're racist towards Black people and Black Americans in the US, because those were the groups of people to whom racist whites projected their racism towards at the start of our country. To use the term BAME not only dismiss our culture and our history as Black Americans in the States, it diminishes the history between Blacks and other ethnic minority groups in the States as well, because Black people in America, we've not only endured racism or white groups, it's come from Asian communities and from mixed ethnic communities as well. And so to group us all together, am I still here for you guys? Okay, to group us all together, diminish that part of our history and our understanding of people. And it says that all of us have endured the same sort of it's saying that all of us have endured the same things historically, which is not true. Coming to London, I've been exposed to so many different types of people in the world. I've lived in China before, but coming to London, I've been exposed to every type of person in the world. And to be grouped with people that I don't even know about, had no knowledge about, don't know their history, where they've come from, the trials and tribulations that they have, the cultural references that they take on, I feel like that's ignorant for me to group myself with people that I don't know, and to have those people be grouped with me when our allegiances might be different, our needs might be different, our everything might be different. So like it was said before, it's very lazy. And it's a very nice way of just saying white people and then everybody else. and I don't think that I don't think that within itself is inclusive to just say white people and everybody else over here. So we all have our own identities, in the same way that white people are given their special treatment to own their identity, German, Irish, whatever the case may be. We should be able to do that as well. We should not just be grouped in one group. We are all different people. We all have differences, and it's okay that we have differences. It's us acknowledging those differences and respecting it is what needs to be done. But to group us all as one is, I don't think, categorically correct. And then also, I just wanted to make one more point about it in reference to the state specifically, because we don't use this term whatsoever. And if we did, it would be really damaging, because what could be said is the BAME community has received reparations. And that would be ignoring the fact that Black people haven't, but Japanese Americans did, because of what they endured in America during a particular period of time. So it could say, well, we've given to these groups, we've done X, Y, Z for these groups, and you're ignoring the fact that you've not been able to contribute to the groups that need it the most, like was said before. So I don't think that BAME is something that should be used unless you're actually talking about an event or some type of coming together where all of those groups are in that same setting and working together in that setting, and that's when you're using it. But to just use it to identify a person and say that you're a member of the BAME community ignores what part of the BAME community they represent. So that's me.
Hey, thank you very much. So not only your position, but seeing that in a more global kind of way in terms of your experiences from other countries. Now I'd like to go over to Cassius and ask Cassius to join us and to give us his, first of all, his views on this topic. I know that Cassius has been having some difficulty with his connection, so I'm not sure if he's hearing us. Any thoughts?
Hello, can everyone hear me? So bad at the moment.
Yeah, we can hear you. Cassius, do you want to try once more? We heard you a moment ago, but you've gone quiet now.
Cassius made a very interesting point in the chat. You might want to point that out, Marilyn.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll start off by Cassius has said in the chat that he feels that these terminologies primarily box people in and have a negative internalization on how people label us and how we label ourselves in wider society. And he feels that it's other people's, it's othering people once again. So that's something that he feels really strongly about. I don't know if Cassius is able to join us now, or maybe wants to put a few more ideas into the box and then maybe we'll come back to them. Okay, so while we're waiting for Cassius to get some, or see what we can do to work on his frequency, I just want to maybe go to some of the questions that we're receiving. So the first question that I can see coming in, it says, many organisations have left behind the use of BAME for the term ethnic minority. Is it any better? And I'm just going to go round. So you're already on the front at the moment, Barry, so I'll start with you and then go back through the group. So do we prefer ethnic minority? And if not ethnic minority, then what else?
You see, this is a difficult question. Trying to find some sort of terminology that would suit. One thing I can say, that ethnic minority is better than BAME. Whether itself is a viable term is another thing altogether, because at least with ethnic minorities, it then ends up including those white marginalized groups that we have within British society, which BAME doesn't really account for. Again, going back to Safia's point and a point that I made earlier, that the white, non-white dichotomy, and the same thing that Nakima had brought in with her experience from the States and then coming here to the United Kingdom and seeing that. So it's a better term than BAME, possibly slightly more accurate, but is it just as good or is it just as bad? Possibly yes.
Okay, I'm going to read Cassius's response to that, which is in our chat. And what Cassius says is, how many more names will be used to describe the Black person? And I use the word Black as a political term. So the notion of being politically Black is something that's been heavily discussed in terms of literature, and probably, well, definitely preceded the term, you know, BME and BAME, as we're currently discussing at the moment. But just how many more names will be used to describe a Black person is Cassius's point. And I think that that is something, again, that we, you know, is part of this discussion. What I'm taking from that comment is, what are people afraid of to actually say the words Black, or to, you know, it's actually naming it and lumping it together is a kind of softer, feel softer maybe, or may come across as softer. I'm going to go over to yes. Do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I wanted to come in on the is the ethnic minority term any? If you ask me, I don't believe that ethnic minority is an accurate description either, because in terms of numbers globally, the BAME community, Blacks, Asians, we are predominant in the world. So ethnically, we are not minorities. So I do not agree with that term when describing us. And it makes it seem as if our numbers are small. And the reality is that that term is a political term. We're ethnically minors in politics and government. That's where our numbers are small, but globally we are not. So I don't think that it qualifies to describe us as a group only in terms of politics. Does that term relate to me personally? as far as other terms to be used, you say how many other terms could be used to describe the Black person? Well, I think the most sound one would be the Aboriginal, considering history. So that's just my personal opinion. And then I'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you. Safio, how would you like to come in on this question?
So I think the thing to consider here is who is the one creating the label. I think when it comes to the term BAME, why a lot of people find it so offensive or uninclusive is purely because they think of it as a term that someone in the hierarchy of our society, who is most likely to be a white male, has decided to use this term BAME. And I think although it may be seen as an inconvenience maybe to companies, institutions, I think the best way to deal with terminology is to ask, if it's a university, the students and the staff, if it's a company, the employees, what are their preferred terms? Because I don't think there needs to be one general term that's used in every institution, in every company, in every aspect of society. I think having something like a survey, which is sent out to employees every year, where they write what their ethnic identity is and what their preferred terminology would be, is probably the best way to tackle this issue. Because I think no matter what term is put forward, there will always be criticism. So the best way to deal with it is for the people who are impacted to label themselves rather than feeling like they're being labelled or being othered by other people.
Okay. Right, so that leads, sorry, thank you for that. That kind of leads us into another question, which is, what if you take the universities, you know, in terms of it as an organisation, when it's planning for or reporting on the community, I hear what you say about, you know, getting feedback from the community, but how does it, in terms of reporting and planning, how, you know, do you see that there's a pragmatic kind of response or need for some sort of clustering in terms of reporting or in terms of planning purposes? Can you see that there's some of the reasons why this might be used, even if we're not necessarily comfortable with it? So I'll start with you because you're still there. Is that okay, Sophia? You want to kick off?
Yeah, that's fine. So I think universities and organisations in general need to make more of an effort to be specific when they're talking about ethnic groups. I understand the sort of functionality of having a more general term, but I think when it comes to statistics specifically, there should be definitely more of an effort to break down those statistics to see how certain things are affecting Black students, Chinese students, Indian students, rather than having an overall term such as BAME. And I think if you have that breakdown, it's then easier to see how specific ethnic identities need specific needs for that group, rather than seeing it as a general group that can have general policies be made. I think when it comes to implementing policy or introducing new things into the university, they should definitely try and be specific about who they're trying to target and what certain statistics and certain things are being spoken about.
Okay, so Barry, would you like to come in on that?
Yes, and to follow on from what Safia and Kima is saying, then surely it would be a far better use of resources when you end up targeting help that is really required in certain areas. Say, for example, we have Black students, we have Asian students, or Indian students, or Pakistani or Bangladeshi students, or Chinese students. They all have their own individual needs in that particular way. To lump them all together as a BAME, students, it just does everyone a disservice. It's an absolute disservice to be able to do that. The same goes for when you talk about students from other regions. For me, as a business school, for example, we end up celebrating the fact that we have academics from a number of different countries and a number of different backgrounds. From a business perspective, that's incredibly important, because we see that the more diverse a company is, the more diverse a board is, not only in terms of gender, but in terms of race, the more successful they have been and the more successful they actually are. So again, just to echo what Safio is saying, that it should be much more, there should be much more specificity, if I've got that right and if I've got my teeth in properly, that there must be much more specificity. And as a result of that, it would actually benefit the university to target those particular resources in the best cost-effective way and getting a better return on investment and a return on time. Sorry, a lot of business terms there, but I just wanted to put it in that context, in that lens.
Absolutely. Nakima wanted to come in there, so I'll let her come in and then I'll take the comment that Cassius has posted in the chat. Nakima?
Well, I was just going to say something to that. You know, in regards to discussing how the university moves forward with using its resources for each specific group of people, I think a university that was already headed by a diverse group of people would already know to use its resources, each of those groups of people. So a university that's headed by a lack of diversity would have questions of how to go about addressing these things in its head. So I think that it's important that the university is diligent in putting more diverse members of staff at its head, so that these people are aware of the complexities of race and different identities before they're outsourcing resources to just BAME. So that was just my input.
Absolutely. So I'm going to the chat where Cassius has said that he feels disappointed that again, the onus is on Black people to solve terminology that wasn't of our making. People in power know what to do, but keep shutting the door on progress because it destabilizes the status quo. So that's kind of, you know, the sort of way in which you've just been expressing yourself, Nakima, around if there were people, Black people within leaderships of organizations, then they would know, they would be part of doing this and see this as part of a normal piece of work to be done. And therefore, you know, and what the point that Cassius has made is that the question or the solution is given to the people who haven't created the problem, but yet still they're the ones who are asked to come up with a solution to the problem. And that's what I'm taking from the yet again, it's about Black people trying to solve the terminology not of our making. So I think that's something, you know, that we need to consider and continue to consider. There's another question come up in the chat, and it says, some people argue that where there's low diversity in organisation, the term BAME allows colleagues to feel part of a community. What do you think? Do you want to start off? Because I'm just sitting like, in terms of my screen, you're popping up in front of me, Nakima. So would you like to start with that?
Okay. The term BAME makes someone feel a part of a community. Well, coming here as an American student and being thrown that term to me, I literally had to ask, what does it mean? What does each letter stand for? And in my role as the Vice President of Universal Black Minds, I attempted to incorporate that term as much as possible in the way that I described our events and for whom they were for. But regardless of the fact that that was the case, that I did try to be very inclusive with my language, because I understood that there were other members of the community outside of my Blackness who I was meant to represent. It was difficult. Let me see. Sorry. It was difficult. The community that showed up was the community that looked like me, and the communities that were a part of the BAME I was outreach to bring in, they didn't feel involved in this community as much. And so trying to reach out to a group that already has its established cultural community and safety net, and bring them into another cultural community and its safety net and be together and all of this, it was nice, but in reality, it didn't work out that way. And it didn't feel as if I had the other parts of BAME affiliated with me in our journey in Universal Black Minds, if you get what I'm saying. It was very difficult to get the Asian and the mixed ethnic students, because they already had their organizations and their student groups, to come to ours. So even though we were grouped together, not everybody saw it that way enough to want to come together, if that makes sense. So it's a nice thing to say, but in reality, I don't think that still it worked out.
Yeah. Okay, you're breaking up a little bit, so I'm going to move on to something else. I'm going to ask the same question. So it's this notion of where there's a low diversity in an organisation, can BAME be used to bring people together? So what do you think, Sophia?
So I think the whole objective of dismantling the term BAME is to allow people to have this sense of individuality, and because they don't feel like their identity is being included in that category. But if in a low, sort of a low ethnic organisation, that term is actually helpful in bringing a sense of community, then who are we to say that they shouldn't be allowed to use that terminology? I think if they feel included and they feel a sense of community in being part of a BAME network within a certain organisation, and they're happy to refer to themselves as that, then like I said, who are we to say that they shouldn't identify as that? But I think the issue that needs to be addressed in this particular example is the issue of why does that organisation have such a low rate of non-white employees? So I think once that issue has been addressed, the whole issue of BAME becomes less significant, because if you have more of a diverse workforce, then maybe if they then want to have individual communities between Black members and between Asian members, or between Indian specific ethnic identities, they can do that. But when they don't have enough diversity to be able to form those specific groups, I can understand why they would feel included in this BAME community.
Okay, thank you. Cassius has just come back up on screen, and I'm just wondering if we want to try the connection, Cassius?
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. Thank God for that. It's been a struggle. I just want to concur with what everyone else has said so far, and I'm so pleased to be on a panel where the discussions can be somewhat unified in the outrage of the use of the word BAME. And I just think that, since slavery times, there's always been a category or a name to call Black people, and it's been derogatory all the way through. And there's some names I've written down here, but I'm not going to mention them because they're so awful in regards to historical context of name calling and othering. And I just feel like the word BAME has just reintroduced this this othering that is so painful. And I just cannot bear to think or be part of any organization that still considers the use of this term. And also, I think there needs to be a readdressing of how we view ourselves within those terms. And I feel they devalue heritage, they devalue culture, they devalue everything that makes one feel like a human being, really. It's very dehumanizing, I think, in a lot of ways. And I suppose I think about, I heard Barry talking about his cultural heritage, and I also heard Safia talking about her cultural heritage in Nakima as well. And so my great-grandmother is Indian, of Indian descent. And, you know, that's really important for me and my family. And I just think, you know, I want to make sure that I can capture and really value all those parts of me, parts of my family that are really important to us. And some people may not feel that way, and that's fine, because it's all about awareness raising at the end of the day. But for me, I strongly resist those terms. And what I find is that even with my children who are born here, I'm born here, my children are born here, but still my children are viewed as BAME or ethnic minority, or, you know, call them what they are, they're British children. You know, and that needs to be strongly rectified in so many different ways.
Okay, thank you. Glad that you've been able to say that. In the chat, you put a comment. Do you want to just raise that comment?
Well, which comment was it?
Sorry, I don't know who can see what. You've said in the chat that the solution exists in all of us. As white allies are important in redressing some of these historical labelling, and that have caused so much distress to people of colour.
Yeah, well, I think it's an education for everyone, isn't it? And I think when I consider myself as a Black professional, it's more likely that I'm going to be in situations or in organisations where I'm probably going to be the only one or one of the very few. So I think it's definitely about educating my white counterparts about some of the language they may have been brought up with, because when we think about language, it's very powerful, and also language exists within the lived experience. So if we're talking about educating and creating allies, it's about actually pinpointing when language is used, which is upsetting, not only to me, but to people also around me who may not identify within that particular ethnic group. So I think it's about everyone taking responsibility. If they hear something which is upsetting, but they may not be within that cultural group, they can still stand up and be counted. And that's what I mean by allies. I think it's really important not to put all the burden on one particular group as being the one who can solve all this issue. It's an issue for everyone, and everyone needs to be included in that.
Absolutely. Barry, you didn't get a chance to comment on that question. Would you like to come in on that?
I'm just so glad that Cassius has come through. I was almost willing him, come on, to come through, and it's fantastic seeing his comments as well. To go back to the question in terms of organizations of low diversity, again, I've become Safia's fan club apparently on here, that again, following on from her point, and I mean that with total sincerity, by the way, and Nakima and Cassius, that where there are advantages, these so-called low diversity organizations have taken advantage of that. In terms of, if I can give a personal example, I was the only British Pakistani in one particular organization, the only one. And one of very, very few members of the ethnic minority within that particular organization. We weren't even in those numbers that we could even club together and form a support group of, if you wish. But when it came to putting down specific stats and so on, I had HR come up to me and said, oh, Barry, by the way, do you speak any other languages? And I said, yes, a couple. How many? 6 in total. And they went, oh, wonderful. That will be marvelous for our diversity stats that we have somebody here and our number of languages has just risen by 6. I said, yes, and my English is getting better day by day. Like Cassius, I was born in the United Kingdom. My children are born here, and again, we're still ethnic minorities 3 generations later.
Yeah.
But where these particular low diversity organizations then suddenly see where there's an advantage, they will accept it, and where there isn't an advantage in terms of equal pay, for example, then that's not considered fully. But where you have organizations where there is much more and higher diversity, this is much more appreciated in a different context. Because, for example, in more diverse organizations, speaking several languages is just seen as normal. Really, it's seen as normal.
And positive.
And very positive. I had this person from HR turn around to me and actually say, how have you learned 6 languages? And I then had to explain to the lady, the heritage that I come from. I said, by the time I was 4, I spoke my mother tongue, which was my native tongue of Urdu. Then by the time I was 6, I was learning Arabic because we had to learn Quranic Arabic, and therefore we learned Arabic, colloquial modern Arabic as well. And then by the time I was 8, we were speaking French. And then it just continues on from there. And she went, oh, really? And I said, well, take a look at your European counterparts. There, it's 3 languages is normal. So why are you making such a big thing of it here? And again, because it was a low diversity organization, that they didn't get it in that particular way.
Yeah.
Can I just pick on a point that you made, Cassius? You talked about feeling quite strongly about the term BAME in terms of what you would participate in or not participate in. And I'm going to pick up on one of the questions which asks, do any of you remember the first time you realised that you just didn't approve of the word BAME, that you just, couldn't, it just didn't sit with you? Was there any moment or time or anything that happened to make you feel that way?
It's interesting that because I saw that question, and what immediately came to my mind was it wasn't so much the word BAME, it was the other words that were used before then that made you really realise that you were different. Because I speak to friends who come from predominantly Black countries, and when they come to this country, they never knew they were Black until they came here.
Absolutely.
And I think that any kind of name labeling or it runs side by side with racism and discrimination and all the other isms that I can think about. And I think it's a virus. I really do. And I think for some people, they feel safer when they can label and categorize somebody and put them in a box, because then all their stereotypes and assumptions can then be projected into that box, and you don't have to think too much about it. But when you see individuals stepping out of that box, it's too difficult to think about, and I think that is a huge problem. I really do. And I don't want to be in box. I don't want to be in a box. I don't want to be in anyone's box. I want to be in my box, which is the Cassius box.
Okay, well, thank you.
Can I just say, Mary, to back up on, we are not one homogenous group. Within the difference, there's difference. And that's so important, you know, and I cannot understand when people cannot understand that.
Sorry, I'm going on here and you didn't see the mic. 100%, absolutely, 100%, that we are not homogenous in any way, shape or form. We are as individual as our DNAs are. Totally, totally unique. Every single person is utterly unique. Forgive me if I'm taking somebody else's turn, Marilyn, but I'd like to...
No, we'll just keep going around. So
I'd like to pick up on something that Cassia said, that going back to the question of when did we realize that BAME was a word that didn't sit, and I totally concur with what Cassius had actually said, that it wasn't the word BAME, it was the other words that ended up bringing that to mind. It triggered something in my memory, which I would like to share if you would allow me. There is one derogatory term in there, but I'm using it from a position of knowledge and a position of strength as opposed to anything else, if you will allow me. The first time I realized was I was one Pakistani Asian amongst a group of white friends, and we were going off to go bike riding, and we needed to stop off at a friend's house. We were all about to go in, and then one of them turned round and said, I don't think Barry should come in. Mm. And they turned round and said, oh yeah, because David's dad will kill him if he does. And I said, why? Is there an issue? And he said, yeah, you're a Paki. He'll kill him if he finds out that Paki was in his house. And it was that ended up, before I was one of the boys. And we'd play, we'd laugh, we'd do homework together and whatever kind of thing like that. But when it came to that particular thing of everybody going into this one particular guy's house, that's what really brought it all. And that's why I have such an allergy to the BAME connotation. Because as Cassia said, we're in nowhere near in terms of being homogenous in any way. And then I took that word as something that actually empowered me, and very proudly, so that I wear that on my sleeve. I'm a card-bearing British Pakistani. Come play me at cricket or polo anytime you want. I'll wipe the floor with you. So that is something that has empowered me as opposed to denigrated me in any way, shape or form. But that was the thing that ended up putting this into my head. That, no, that's not what we are. We are much more than that. So forgive the derogatory term, but as I said, I'm using it from a position of strength as opposed to negative.
We are a university community and we are all adults. So there is a kind of sense, and we know the context of tonight's discussion. Safia, would you like to come in on that?
So for me, I don't think there was ever a specific moment in which I realised that I didn't approve of the word BAME, but in the last sort of year or so, I've been speaking to a lot of different students on my course, and many of them are ethnic minorities or whatever terminology you would like to use. And one thing that repeatedly came up was the importance of intersectionality when it comes to identity, and the fact that there's not one word that describes someone, especially when you consider the intersection between race and religion. For example, the experiences and hardships that a Black Muslim may go through could be completely different to the experiences of a Black Christian, and yet they're lumped into the same racial category of Black without taking into consideration their differences. I think this also is seen as well in the term African. There isn't really a sense of nationalism within Africa because each country has a sense of nationalism within themselves. An Egyptian wouldn't call themselves African, they would call themselves Egyptian. A Nigerian would call themselves Nigerian. So I think it ignores how many differences there are within these individual terms. And so in the last year, having these discussions with my friends, that's when I sort of became more enlightened and realized that this term BAME just isn't sufficient.
Absolutely. I mean, you picked up on and started to allude to one of the questions around the fact that, that, and I think that somebody else said this, Barry, that you don't even know that you're Black until you come to a country like the UK. If you're sorry, it was Cassius that said, that in an all-Black country, you're just a person. And it's only when you come to a country like the UK that you actually know that you're a Black person. And, so context means a lot, that understanding. And as you say, even within a culture, Cassius wanted to come in, and then I'm going to go to, it looks like Barry and Nakima, or Nakima and Barry. Cassius?
Can I just go back on what Safio said, because I feel so envious. I feel so envious when I meet my African friends, and they can actually say, I'm from Uganda, I'm Kenyan, I'm Egyptian, I'm from Saudi Arabia, because what you have there is a strong sense of identity.
Yes.
Black doesn't, even the word Black, even though I use it as a political term, it doesn't really signify or identify where you are from. But when you hear people from Africa and they talk about their culture, their heritage that dates back many generations, I get so envious of that. And the reason why I get so envious of that, because I know that my family was one of the ones that were taken and enslaved and treated with hostility and labeled and shackled. And that's that deep sense of pain that I still feel every single day. Even though it may have happened 500 years ago, it still carries with me today, and my children and my wider members of my family. And that's how much it means to me. When I cannot actually say where my origins of my family come from, because I do not know. All I can say is they come from Africa, but I don't know what part, maybe the West Coast, who knows?
Absolutely. And, and the question, the comment in the chat is that most Africans have their own identity, but they're clustered into this Black or BAME box simply because of the colour of their skin. Whereas when they're from a country in Africa, they know exactly where they come from, and they know exactly who they are in terms of their ethnicity. So, the colour Black is given as a way of just, again, as you say, homogenizing a group of people and simplifying and making it easy to kind of package in some way. Nakima, do you want to come in?
I don't know that there was a first instance that I didn't like it. I just knew that it was something different. It was interesting to be encountered here because I had never encountered it. In the States, Black people ourselves, within ourselves, have conversations about how to term ourselves. So to be automatically grouped as Black when in the States, we're arguing, are we Black? Or does Black have a negative connotation associated with it? So then are we African American? But then wouldn't the Africans who are presently coming to the US and gaining citizenship be considered African Americans? So then what are we? Then you have groups that are calling themselves ADOS, which is African descendants of slaves. So that is a term. And then it's just so many different terms within the Black community itself to terminalize ourselves. To do so with other minorities just doesn't make sense.
It's complicated enough.
Exactly.
Just in one box, let alone to put that box in a bigger box.
Yes, it's already that. So,
I
don't know.
So what does this mean then for the staff societies and the student societies that we have here at Roehampton? Because we currently have a BAME staff network, and we currently have a BAME student union officer. We currently, these are terms that we've just accepted and worked with for kind of pragmatic reasons, in that that's the way the data's collected, and if you kind of keep it in the box. And but what does it mean going forward? Do we say, well, we'll have a set of staff networked for each of the individual groups, or do we just have a staff network that people could join? What does it mean? How do we take this forward in terms of staff and student groups? So I don't know if, yeah, Barry, do you want to start?
For me, as I said right at the outset, the word BAME is dead. We should not be associating ourselves with that, full stop. We are not a homogeneous lump of people. We are individuals, and we should celebrate that. It's going to be difficult to find a replacement for BAME or the BAME network, but I don't see it as going as far as having micro networks, as it were. Unity in strength is something which I've always believed in. And here in the United Kingdom, one of the reasons why BAME has come about is because it has been the Black, Asian, ethnic minorities who have come together to fight racism. And that's why that term has really come about. And again, lazily used to describe non-white in that particular way. But our white allies have always supported and will continue to do so, I'm sure. But that term BAME, we have to jettison it and find something else that truly represents us as a diverse academic body or a diverse student body in that particular way. Short of nicking a very successful dance troupe's name and then calling it that, the Diversity Network, I think that might be something which would be a bit more acceptable. Though the IP on that, I'm not sure who owns that anymore.
Okay, so yeah, something for us. What you're doing, it's making us. This is Black History Month. We've got a series of events and opportunities during this month. We need to stop and to reflect and to think and to plan. And this is a time, and it's timely for us to have this conversation. I'll go around each of you, and then just or what I'll do actually, because it's on the same topic, but two questions that came in on similar topic, which was one came in before the meeting, which just said, I wanted to ask you about the term BAME. Have you had any discussions within your network about not using the term or using it less? Because, we're kind of like thinking about what we should be doing. So that was from one of our white allies. Another white ally said, I've always disliked the term BAME. We can't homogenize different ethnic minorities, different ethnicities and cultures and identities in this way. It's dismissive and it denigrates important elements of identity. So what we have is we're pushing on an open door. We're recognizing that we have allies within the university population who are also on side that maybe this isn't the best way of doing things. So I will go back to now, maybe I'll start with Safia, if you want to just talk about, so what does it mean then for our kind of staff groups and student groups and what we call each other? So student societies, I mean, do we have a society for every different group? Do we try to bring groups together? Do we go for diversity? What, just thoughts.
I think terminology around race is always changing. In the example of the word coloured now is considered very unpolitically correct and offensive. When a few generations ago it was widely used. I think the university and specific societies and institutions in general just need to be willing to adapt and change terminology with the times. I don't want to speak on behalf of the entire student population, but I think it's just about getting an insight into their views about their preferred terminology, and having institutions that are willing to adapt and willing to change with the times.
Okay. Nakima, do you want to come in? Are you all right?
Yes, I think that moving forward, it would be important for the university to acknowledge each group individually. I preferably believe that's what would be best. You get a better sense of what each group needs. what each group already has and what each group can then bring to the larger BAME community or to the larger university community. Because when you diminish each group with the term BAME and only attack BAME issues and not everything else, then yeah, it fails. It fails the students who represent each group who's coming to the campus, and our voices feel like we're going unheard, because there are groups that do cater to different Asian groups, the Black community, and other groups of that sort. And so clearly these groups are already finding their own communities, but the university is not acknowledging those individual communities and only assessing all of them as one. So yeah, I think that it's important that the university address each group individually. And coming from the States and having gone to undergrad in the States and seeing how it is there, each group is addressed individually in the States. And so we do know the numbers and statistics of who our members are on campus. And we do have resources for each of those communities. And the best part about it is the simple fact that those universities are catering to each individual group, ethnic minority that they feel like is not that heavily represented. The university is then able to bring in those cultures even more. So where our Asian numbers were low, we were able to put on a lot of different Asian programs so that those students who were there in this predominantly white institution felt like the university sees me. The university has put on something for me and for every group that was on these predominantly white campuses. And it wasn't just that, but the white students who coming from their white backgrounds with their white friends and their white families, not interacting with other groups of people. If you're grouping all of us into one, then that's what we are, just one, but we are our own groups of people. So those white students were then able to learn more about different ethnic groups because the university was putting on these programs where everyone was welcome. So addressing one person's needs on a larger scale, on a university scale, doesn't diminish, it doesn't diminish the identities of anybody else. What it does is help everybody to get a better understanding of everybody. And that's it. But I do believe that not even just our university, but I believe here, British people have an issue with attacking issues directly. You guys don't want to talk about race directly. You don't want to talk about different groups directly. You keep it hush hush and quiet. For me, that is a problem as an American. We like to speak our minds and we like to address things head on. So coming to a country where even though we have our issues are talked about, our issues are known, our issues are being addressed, and our groups and our communities feel strong and good enough within ourselves to talk about these within ourselves and to share our experiences with others. But when you group everyone into one, you're telling people, we don't want to hear your story. We don't want to know what you're about. We kind of just want to keep you in the back burners. And if all of y'all whose story we don't want to know can stay over there, we'll be happy. So don't speak about it. And that's a problem that needs to be addressed, period, here. So
absolutely. So there is that whole issue about talking about race. We don't do it. It's a polite culture. It doesn't want to do things head on. It doesn't want to do things in your face. It kind of wants to do it in a different kind of way. And if you're a bit full on, then, it's a bit, aggressive, or it's a bit loud, or it's a bit pushy. And, sometimes it's different ways of being. I'm going to go to Cassius on this one, and then I'm going to go for picking up some comments from the chat and some closing comments. So Cassius, before we do that.
Okay, I think what really strikes me is that how easy it is to talk about homophobia, how easy it is to talk about Islamophobia, how easy it is to talk about, feminism and sexism. But when it comes to talking about race and ethnicity, there seems to be a huge barrier that exists on both sides. I don't think it's just one side that carries that barrier. I think it exists on both sides, and I can only talk about my own experience of that. And from my own experience, when I have to confront or challenge somebody around their language or their behavior or their attitude, it depends on what day I'm having that day, because there may be some days when I don't want to embarrass that person because they're a colleague and I know them very well, and I don't want to embarrass them, so I tend to just keep quiet and say nothing, which then, you know, makes me culpable in so many different ways as being part and parcel of the problem. But also on the days when I feel able to challenge and really confront people on their attitudes and behaviors, sometimes it doesn't come out the way how I would like it to come out, because I feel so incensed and so surprised by the language that comes out. So to looking forward or moving forward, I think the name, I think it's BAME over, actually. It's not even game over, yes. It's BAME over. And I think we're intelligent people and we can find better ways to describe how our network and what that network can do for the university and what that network can do for people who frequent that university campus. So, you know, it's not going to be rocket science, is it?
I'm going to go to one of the comments, and one of the comments that's come in has said, you know, maybe and it talks to what you've all been saying about the action side of this, you know, that it's about being able to do as well. And maybe we're looking at the anti-racism network actually being anti-racist and being, you know, up there. But it's a suggestion that's been put out there with a big question mark. And these are things, as I said, through Black History Month and over the next few weeks, we're going to spend some time be thinking about and just kind of coming up with some alternatives. An awful lot of issues have come up tonight and things that we need to talk about. And I think that I want to just pick up one of the things that Cassia said about maybe the frame of mind and how we are and where we are sometimes affects how we react or whether we even react. And I'm very mindful of this. In a conversation I was having with a colleague the other night, we were just talking, and one of the things that I think I would say defines me and how I define myself, if someone stopped me in the street and says, "What do you do?" I say, "I'm a teacher," because that's probably where that's where I started. That's how I stem. That informs the way I am and the things that I do. And when you teach, and those are people who've come through that teaching kind of tradition and background, we're always helping others. We're always forgiving others. If somebody makes a mistake, you want to help them to put it right. You want to help them to develop and to grow and to get there. So sometimes we need to bring that, what we would do with children, with the people that we care about, to our colleagues and to our friends as well. We need to have a sense of kindness around it. We need to have a sense of forgiveness. And people, if you don't know, you don't know. And if you make mistakes, you make mistakes. And sometimes we've got to allow and be open and sensitive to, kind of helping people over a situation, as well as, pointing in the right direction and challenging them to do things. So that's what you do, you challenge and you want people to move on. But it was that thing about, sometimes it's about where we are as well, and the whole thing comes together. But we don't, I'm totally we don't own the solution. It's not for me to tell you what to do. It's not for me to give you the answer. It's definitely for people to take responsibility for that. But that doesn't mean I won't help. Doesn't mean that we're not there and that we're not supportive, because we have our lives and we will make progress together on some of these things. Okay, it's coming up to 7:20, and we've spent quite a long time on this discussion and debate, which is absolutely fabulous. And what I'm going to ask for is maybe just one last ending comment from something maybe you'd like to see changed or something you want to see challenged, that you're kind of saying, well, as a result of this conversation and putting it all out there, what do we want to see? What kind of change might we see? So I'm going to start with you, Safia, and give you your last point for the night.
So this is sort of leading on from something that Nakima said about having a specific groups. I think that ignores the issue of intersectionality. So I think when it comes to defining ethnic minorities and different racial groups, for me personally, and that's probably because of my background being from a mixed background, I think it's so important to stress intersectionality and knowing that you don't have to define to one certain ethnic group or one certain identity. So going forward, I would like to see intersectionality being taken into more consideration when it comes to defining ethnic minorities.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I had my mute off. Harry, one last thing.
This conversation could go on for so much longer than the time that we have. My one thing is that the term BAME actually excludes other people, and it's an exclusive term, and that is something that as a university we should not be looking at encouraging. If I had my way, we would have student societies on just about absolutely everything that is under the sun, to be very honest. And in terms of every single nationality, every single subset within that, just to celebrate the diversity that we have. So my thing would be this: dump BAME and accept another term that is much more inclusive of everyone, and especially our white allies as well, because we want them to be part of something, to feel welcome, and that's, I think, what we should be looking at pursuing.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to go to Nakima for your last final point.
Okay, my final point, I do believe that BAME is a term that should not be used. I do believe that people should have the ability to identify themselves the way that they choose in all regards, and not be given some restrictive list or terminology as such. Just really quickly, I know it's supposed to be the last thought, but I just want to throw something out there just to give an example, okay?
Ready to catch.
Okay, at the start of the census in the US, there was there was white and Negro. And so when you had people coming over from different countries at this point, whether they were white or not, all of these people from these different countries only identified themselves as white. Nobody ticked off Negro. Even people who would be placed in that group when it was established. So I do think that it is important that we all have the ability to label ourselves, and remember that these labels that have been given to us are political in nature, and that they have no real life resonance in our lives other than these political statuses that we hold on a global scale. And that's the only thing that we should take with identifying ourselves in these racial categories, is that these are political terms.
Okay, thank you very much. And Cassius, can you give us out your final word?
I think when I think about change, I think the change begins with me, and it begins with me in regards to the language I use and how I use that language. And already I'm refraining from using languages that really devalue my experience and know there's people who look like me. I'm beautiful, and people that look like me are beautiful, and that needs to be, celebrated.
Okay, thank you very much.
Amen.
Okay, so I'm
saying amen to Cassius.
Okay, thank you. All right, so just to kind of conclude what we've ended up, I think the major conclusion is that BAME is dead, or as somebody said, the BAME is over, So we're in a situation where BAME is dead. We need to think very much around the intersectionalities and those differences, because BAME is excluding and the intersectionalities show that those are about individuals and the differences. We need to recognise that that kind of overarching title is a political one. It's not, it has no other kind of real resonance outside of, you know, sort of a political status that it's being given. And especially if you look on a global scale, the notion of minority, if you're looking worldwide, actually there, you know, it just doesn't weigh up in that sense. And if we're going to bring about change, the change starts with us. It starts with how we see ourselves, how we perceive ourselves, how we interact with the kind of wider communities, and that is, you know, so very, very important. So what I'd like to say now is thank you so very much to the panel members that you've shared of yourselves, you've shared your ideas and your thoughts, and you've put out so much for people to think about. What you've done is raise some challenges for the university, and we need to take those forward. And we started off with Al, who is our race equality champion. And I know that she's listening to this conversation, you know, she's stayed on board, and she'll pick up on some of these issues in relation to what does it mean for us going forward. But, you know, we're in a time of change, and this is just something else that we need to look at. And all of these things come in cycles, and it's just time now to look at where we are, to take stock and to think of how we're going to take it forward. So I'd just like to say that I'm going to declare this session over, and this, you know, just say thank you all very much for taking part. So thank you. Yeah.
And thank you, Mariam, for hosting.
Thank you, Mariam.
Thank you so much, Marilyn. It's been genuine, very, very interesting. Very interesting.